Let me introduce myself. My name is Karina Kyuzalova. I particularly work with automation in the banks for 2 years. Our system involves web part and a desktop part. We are automating the web part, and currently I'll tell you about the automation of the desktop version, the tools, the pluses and minuses, the problems we have confronted, and how we customize the existing solutions. Words about myself. Before QA, I worked as a Java developer for many years. Then I switched to QA, and now I'm a main expert in home credit bank. I think all of you know what automation is. Some of you have maybe automated something, at least web app. We'll start with levels of automation. Unit test is the basic level. Developers are usually responsible for it, and auto testers are usually responsible for API layer and UI layer. I'll tell you about one of the UI testing. It includes web testing, mobile app testing, and desktop app testing. I'll ask you from the beginning who have come across the automation of the web app and desktop app. Quite a few of you. Let's talk about them briefly. I think many know what tools are available for web testing. Some of them are on the slides. Quite a few of them exist, many of them are documented, and many of you have come across them. For mobile apps testing, there are also quite a few testing solutions that allow to automate iOS and Android apps. What about desktop automation? What are the tools available for this type of automation? Which one should we choose depending on your solution and your app solution? Starting with the peculiarities of the desktop app. Desktop app is an app we usually install and which has some requirements for operating system and for hardware. So what are the tools we're going to use for automation? I have divided all the tools into two parts. First is the tools for element search and framework which would allow us to automate our scenario. We start with element search. There exist two standard solutions which fit for any framework: UI Spy and Inspect. USpy is the obsolete one, not recommended for use, while Inspect is a well-supported one and allows to find all the necessary elements for automation. But it has a big issue. While working with them, it constantly freezes and of course has errors, and which actually slows down automation and gets on your nerves. So if in future you select a framework with its own element search, it would be great, because usually it doesn't have such problems and allows to find all the elements of the app. Now a few words about the existing paid framework. First of all, I have divided them into paid and non-paid one, because many companies this is important. We'll start with the paid ones. Test Complete, Test Architect, and Studio are among the major ones. They have their own pluses, like quick launch. They also conduct their support and a wide spectrum platform we can automate. Minus is also present. It's cost and price, which is critical for the companies. and an ability to be customized. So if you're not happy with the functionality of this tool, you have to wait for long and solve this issue through the community. So I dwell in detail about the open source frameworks, of which there are quite a few, and they are based on various approaches. For each concrete task, you could select a more convenient solution. Frameworks. I've divided them into three categories, such as frameworks with non-standard approaches, frameworks based on UI library, and the ones based on Selenium WebDriver. And a few words about each of the framework groups. In the end, I'll help you make a solution, make a decision based on their plus and minuses. We'll start with non-standard approach frameworks. Why non-standard? Because the element search there is based on difficult, complicated solutions. The first one is SQLix. It is based on the detection of images. So you can see that the actions will be done here with the particular images. A few examples. We click an image. We have a command line. We open Notepad and put in the text. Through these non-standard approaches, this framework has significant downside because its operation is quite complicated in terms of implementation. They are slow in finding elements, and it's difficult to debug them or customize them in the future. Next one is robot framework. Was initially developed to write acceptance tests, and it uses keywords guided search. I made all the examples with the help of the Notepad. We set up we use variables setup. Now I'll tell you a few words about the framework using UI libraries. And in fact, there exists another framework, but Flay UI is next step. You can find its source code. By the way, there are various apps that Windows allows to automate. This is an example. Maybe it looks complicated for some of you. We click the save button. A few words about the frameworks that are based on the Selenium WebDriver specifications. While working with it, it allows you to write an auto test similar to the well-known auto test of the web apps, which will not be very different, at least their implementation. The first framework I'll tell you about is a WebDriver. It's made by Microsoft, a well-supported one. It works with the latest Windows version. It also has a search tool, which is also developed by Windows, by Microsoft. It works with the JSON protocol and allows to write tests in more clear format. Next, we have the Winio framework, which is also based on Selenium WebDriver specifications. On the slide you can see the scheme of its work. Its kernel is inbuilt. It allows to automate a big scope of various apps. Here's an example of its use. Here again, it's open in a notepad. And I think we'll now discuss the most interesting comparison, the criteria that were important for us while selecting a particular tool. It is support of its tool, how well support is provided for the documentation of this tool. Does it transfer the metadata, which we needed in certain cases? Also, this data was collected when we were developing infrastructure. Its cost, the availability of its search tool, and the speed of search, since the app is quite heavy. There's a lot of levels of windows, tables, a large number of strings, not subject to filtering. We start with review. We start with the complete test architect paid frameworks. As I said earlier, they are well supported. They have their own search tool. They're paid. They transfer metadata. The search speed is quite high. I gave a concrete search speed for the most complicated tables. The only difference is that Test Complete helps to automate Windows apps, and while the other one can automate apps from almost everything else. The next category is non-standard frameworks, SQA and Robot Framework. They have documentation which is not particularly detailed because of their complication structure. It's not easy to work with them. They don't transfer the metadata. They don't have a inbuilt search tool, but it's a free solution. Allows to automate your work on any operational system. Because of its non-standard approach, the search speed is quite slow. There's common frameworks that we found most interesting. I'll start with Winio, because now it doesn't have support. Its code is not being additionally developed. It doesn't have its own search tool, but it does transfer metadata, allows to automate a Windows app. It is free, and this search speed turned out to be quite slow, about 3 minutes for big tables, which for us was quite critical because we have quite a few of such elements, and the test would run for an indefinite amount of time. Now we'll switch to WebDriver. It has a good documentation, good support, doesn't have its own search tool, but it's recommended to use Inspect, which was developed by the same company. It's free for use, the operation system Windows. It searches for elements quite slowly, similar to WebDriver, and it doesn't transfer metadata. We're not be able to bypass this minus, so we did not select this option. Eventually we selected the Fly UI driver. It has a good support, high speed of search, its own search tool. The main criteria is that it was the fastest one to find elements in our app. We started using it to write auto tests. We tried to do it, and eventually we came across a minor problem. The high entrance into the test, so the implementation of such test is very much different to implementation of web app. It required the understanding of documentation and understanding of how the Java works and how it needs to be implemented. Since very often sometimes the project involves people who had not worked with automation before, it was high intensity work. We were looking for a solution that would help us speed up the auto-test developer. And we've remembered that when WebDriver and Selenium Driver I developed with Selenium specification, we can add it. Eventually we saw that it wasn't particularly easy to implement, but we left the kernel of Fly UI driver and added on top the wrapper that would allow us to work through the Selenium WebDriver. This is what we got. This is our solution. Selenium driver with the kernel of the Fly UI driver, which solves all our problems at that stage. And we continued writing auto-test, wrote a certain scope of them. Our tests became more advanced. We're going deeper and deeper, and we had problems with the lack of implementation of certain commands in our Java. So we were confronted by this decision whether we customize our Java further or we make our test fragile by putting on additional code. So you probably understood which option we chose. So we decided to work on our Java further. Our development was divided into two categories. Is development of existing commands. We added exception or programs working with other points or implemented new commands. I'll tell you examples of both of them later. We'll start with the additional work. I'll give you an example of element search. I think all of you worked with the find element command. They needed a special custom treatment based on the locator. This is how it looked like. This is what we used with the Fly UI driver, and if you use a different driver, but the same approach. First we found some custom executor, find an element executor, then we found some strategy of search. This is how it looks, you can see it on the screen, and we implemented the logics we needed. It had to do with the processing of the command whilst transferring this locator. And now we move to the most difficult and most interesting part, how to add a new command, which is not available in the driver, but APIs of the Selenium has it and you want to use it. The add a new command involves 4 stages. First stage is we need to implement the logic of the command, what our driver will do. Then include in the command driver the kernel. Then we add commands to the list of commands that will be used by our auto test, and we add the commands to the dictionary. A few words about each point. We'll start with the implementation of the command. I used the getRect, which was not existing in the driver at the time. First, we add our class with executor. Here, for example, we have an element, switch to the active window, receive the properties of the body rectangle, and in coordinate we apply the standard implementation.
Later on, we need to include the team into the driver's core. As long as our core is flowy, then in flowy desktop driver class we need to add, after in group, the compilation of our team, our executor. It's quite straightforward here. Next, we are moving one level up, and we need to add the team to the list of maintained or compatible teams from outside. We add the variable with the name of our team. As for the Vinium, this is common driver. And we add the connection of our teams with Selenium IP and Vinium implementation with the initiation of Selenium commands. We add the command into the vocabulary, and now our driver can easily maintain the command, and when it is called up in like in Selenium, we'll get a correct response. I told you about the existing instruments, about the adjustments. Let's draw some conclusions about the tools for the search of the elements. It is advised to use a standard instrument inspect, or as far as the actual framework is concerned, the flow-in expert. Frameworks need to be selected. I showed you the comparison table. It's about what is needed for your task. If there are some trivial tasks, you can use non-standard frameworks which are quite straightforward in writing. If tasks are more sophisticated, then it makes sense to look into UI library frameworks or Selenium WebDriver. Again, based on the trial and error method, whichever framework fits your application better. In the same manner, we can customize it. If we use free of charge framework, we can customize it. In its simplest version, we can add some additional exception thing. We can debug it. The most difficult one, we can fine-tune it for our own needs by any method available to us, by adding commands or through rectifications. And now I'm going to look at the slide, which is about the desktop automation payback period on our project. This is approximate numbers, but they will still help you with a decision whether you need automation of desktop on your project or not. As far as this moment is concerned, we have automated a total of 94 test cases. Therefore, desktop application. The difficulty of hands-on testing is 24.82 working days. This is for each regress, which is once every 2 weeks. For the development of auto tests, the labor intensity is about 357 working days for automation of 94 cases. This way we can see that considering the number of regresses per month, The payback period of this automation is a bit more than 7 months. Naturally, we need to consider time for maintenance and support, updating and fixing. It takes about 1 week a month for this activity on desktop automation. And perhaps it would be interesting for you to learn how much time and resources are spent on updating and fine-tuning the driver. The basic one, it took us 6 months. We tried different options. We looked at our option, the solution which would fit us better. And I decided to calculate the processes or the tasks for the teams and for the editing. Throughout the whole period we had a total of 27 tasks. On the average, spending 3 days per task, and as a result we have 81 full working days for the driver. I can add here that for the updating of the driver, when we just released it, the updating was done by the automation team. In other words, the system where I'm a lead, the guys, automation guys themselves, were trying and testing and implementing the driver and fine-tuning it. Then this activity was delegated to the team who support the framework and the infrastructure of all the tests. That is why now it is done by that team. In fact, that's all I had to tell you. I have some links here, which are principal for automation of desktop to understand how it works. I'm talking about the specifications of web drivers for you to understand which commands exist, which can be further improved, and documentation of your formation to understand how the elements in the desktop application work. That's it. Here you can find my contact details if you have questions, and that's it. Thank you. Hello, thank you for your presentation. To a certain extent, I'm a stakeholder here, vested interest, because I wanted to ask you, it looks to me that at the initial stage, the completes and other payable solutions were sifted or filtered off because of this criterion. I will tell you from the very beginning. Initially, test completes, we were writing all the applications. And later on, we decided to consider other options. And the pricing criterion was important here. That is why I was rather based on the desk complete to transition to some free of charge solution. And desk complete was managing quite well with such simple and medium level cases. More complicated ones appeared later. It's just that based on what you just told us, in fact the paid solutions are good if matter of price or cost is not the most important thing for you. So Desk Complete, for instance, was working well with our applications. Okay, thank you. Thank you for your presentation. It was a very relevant presentation. Automation of desktop indeed is a pain in the ass for all of us. It's good that it's not my ass here, but anyway, but it's important for my colleagues anyway. And gradually from my question about test complete, I know my colleagues also use test complete, and it didn't fit because of the reason that our application was on DevExpress, and test complete doesn't work with DevExpress for some reason unknown. Ah, okay. Maybe because of the same reason, because of being commercial version, it didn't fit our needs. But as far as I know, our colleagues tried Appium, which is WinApp. I don't know for sure. I think it was Appium, and he was almost happy. It looked like auto tests started to work fine, and then later on he said that, for instance, in debugging mode, when they get the studio and something, the auto test itself is starting to lose focus. Yes, focus. It happens to all of these instruments actually. It's hard to fine-tune them because of this focus, and it's hard to do that because you can move the mouse and it drops. And in terms of continuous testing, if you launch it and not touch the machine, I do use local machines because we use clouds with drivers, and there nobody is interfering with the mouse there. No, we're doing virtual machines also. On virtual machines, we don't have it. We had problems related to, say, the unupdatable version, which had to be updated, and for that we used a robot. We used our own robot, and if there was an error in the application, automatically it doesn't cover the tickets in Windows, and then we used a robot written out for that. But what is losing focus, often we had problems with some Windows, but in fact we circumvented it by additional re-switching to another window, but we did it in a circumvented way. Thank you very much about the update of the application we have, and exactly the same problem. Daily we have to update the application. Anyway, thank you for your presentation. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. My name is Dmitry. Recently I had a similar task in terms of testing. I used WebDriver because Microsoft advised it as a replacement for QI code, and I connected it to my framework as a dependency, and I've added AutoMouse media support, and it started to work. But the problem was to find the elements, the speed of search and elements. And I have a couple of questions here. For instance, here I'm writing on Java, because this is the requirement of the company. We also do that. You had examples on C#. C# are drivers, but all the tests are on Java. Then the question is, Plowin that you recommend, is there a client library for Java? No. Well, all of them are .NET. But we write auto tests on Java. And we use framework, which on the web side works with Serenity, with Citrus, and there they have some functions that allow the team, just like in Selenium, to call up the commands. So our auto tests are written on Java. I think all of these classical things implemented on .NET. Okay, and then another question, you mentioned a number of programs to search for elements, but what you are using for that, you didn't mention that. See, we use Flowe core, they have their own instrument, Flowe instrument, and I told you that it's better if framework has its own instrument, because I don't know whether you encountered it or not, but inspect kept on handing. I don't know, we never had this. Maybe it's because our application was heavy. Our application is also written on .NET Framework number 2, 15 years ago. So I wouldn't call it lightweight. Anyway, inspect is a standard instrument anyway. And they're quite good. Thank you. Yes, Karina, thank you for your presentation. My question, it sounds like a multi-layered cake made of different additions and things. How many tests do you have there which crash not because of the bugs, but because some conflict within the text, and how do you do this? You mean related to driver? Yes. As I told you, in 1.5 or even 2 years we had 27 tests for improvement, and now we have a problem that we encountered. The problem related to these huge tables and finding the elements. We have for that a team which is doing the framework and supporting infrastructure, and when we find some problem there, usually it's FTRs, they're looking at auto tests, they're saying that your auto test is only hang, and it's obvious that it's a driver's error because it didn't go through scroll, you didn't click on the element or something. It's obvious that it's not auto test problem, it's more like the problem of the driver. By the auto testers look at on whose side is the error, driver or side or the auto test side, and then they start send all these things to the team. How often do you have this? Say a single run, 94 tests, and how many fallen tests because of crash tests, because of this framework behavior? Quite rare, actually. We can say that it's working quite stably at the moment, and in the past 6 months we had, I don't know, 2 improvements because of driver, and they were quite insignificant, or the ones related to the structure of elements that we didn't work in the past. So it was quite stable, and the way the process is working, we're not simply improving the driver and throw it into the working auto tests. We're testing it sometime, we understand that it's quite stable, and only then we put it on, and then it's used in auto tests. Well, sounds great. Thank you for your presentation. My question is about the elements. You mentioned you have plus minus 1 minute for the search. Is it for the one tree or the search for the elements in the test? I looked at the most difficult case scenario one, for instance, the window of the 3rd level. Actually, we also had to improve it. The 3rd level windows couldn't be found by the driver at all. The 3rd level of windows, and there is some kind of table there for multiple lines, and to find an element in this table they had to spend so much time. And for the drawing of the whole tree, when I open the application, I want to see which elements are seen here. Maybe you imply the elements of the search of elements instruments, but it's quite quickly, at least it's not milliseconds, but maybe seconds. I understand, thank you.
My English very bad.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Сейчас слышно меня?
Я на английском слышу.
Ну, не тот канал, наверное, включили.
Sorry about that.
Я только эту фразу поняла.
Ну, слышно меня сейчас? Вы слышите меня?
Can you hear me now?
Слышно перевод?
Да, слышно.
Yes.
Okay. So my question is about all the tools you.
У меня вопрос о других инструментах, о которых вы рассказывали.
About any setup method?
Есть какой-то метод сетапа? Есть метод с помощью сетапа, когда мы можем очистить машину перед тем, как запускаем один тест, между одним тестом и другим. И что касается самих тестов, мы можем их использовать внутри CI, внутри интеграции CI.
tools that
Есть вообще какие-нибудь инструменты, которые можно использовать в Windows
maybe
и в Mac, в Linux, может быть, одновременно?
Я поняла. Ну, касаемо того, как мы...
I understand. As far as setuping is
у нас
concerned,
и для того процесса, и для другого
for both
используются
processes we
различные
use
роботы.
different
Я вам,
robots.
не расскажу,
I
потому
cannot
что
tell you now in detail
занимается
about that
команда
because it is our
инфраструктуры.
infrastructure
То есть мы просто
maintenance team is doing. We're just
специфичны
writing
для своих
scripts
роботов.
for our
Ну,
robots.
и данные
And
гид автотестов у нас,
gift after
встроен
tests,
в
auto
CI,
tests
то есть
are
они
integrated into
запускаются по
CI,
расписанию.
so they're
Опять же, у нас,
launched and run upon the
облако
schedule. Also, we have a driver's cloud,
распараллеливание, там
and
получается,
on the
то есть
parallel
на одной машине крутится
we have a
один тест,
breakdown
нельзя на
of
одной машине несколько
we cannot
запустить.
run a number of tests on a single
Распараллеливание
machine,
на уровне
and we
машин,
do it
получается, происходит. Ну,
we do it on the
и
parallel with
CI,
different machines.
обычный Jenkins
And
используем,
we use CI and Jenkins for that.
Все стандартно.
It's quite straightforward and standard.
Все?
That it?
Большое спасибо, время закончилось.
Thank you very much. We are out of time.
Вопрос? Ну, вопрос вот про то, сколько мы
The
багов,
question about
наверное, насколько часто мы с багами
how often
сталкиваемся,
we
как их решаем, вот молодому человеку.
come across various bugs and how we solve this problem. Please don't forget to
Если вам
score
понравилось,
the
я буду очень
presentation.
рада. Это мое
Put
первое
pluses and
выступление.
minuses. It's my first presentation.
Спасибо.
If you liked it, please